This is SSN.
Story Studio Network.
Hi, my name is Pamela Fuselli, and I'm the host of Popping the Bubble Wrap. Are you the person in your family who worries about the safety of others, about buying safety products and using them? Are you yelling, "Yes, that's me"? This is the podcast for you. Raising a child or children can be a hair-raising undertaking, and keeping them safe is a priority. Parachute's Popping the Bubble Wrap podcast explores what you really need to think about as a parent or caregiver, and provides easy tips on prevention strategies. No bubble wrap here, though. It can be overwhelming at times to care for your child. These days, we're bombarded with scary stories from social media, friends and family, books, and TV. From this volume of information, you'd think we're less safe now than in previous decades. It's not true. In this episode, we'll debunk safety myths, reveal what's really causing injuries, and make the case that popping the bubble wrap is the way to go. Joining me today are Ashley, Heather, and Wyatt. Welcome, and thanks for being part of Parachute's Popping the Bubble Wrap podcast.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Happy to be here.
Do you feel, I'm going to start off with a first question. Do you feel, and this may just be a perception versus a reality, but do you feel your kids are safer than you were growing up, or are they less safe now? And Heather, maybe we'll start with you. Tell us a bit about your kids and how you feel, their risk of safety or safety status is different or the same as yours growing up.
Yeah, I have a 9-year-old and a 13-year-old, and they like to push things to the max. So safety has always been at the forefront of our minds. Falls were a big deal when they were little. They both had incidents where they managed to tip over their high chairs when they were little, and from bouncing on the couch, trampolines, falls never seem to end. Even now at 9 and 13, they still get distracted and fall down the stairs, or they can fall off when they're riding their bikes or playing on the monkey bars. I don't think they ever outgrow falls. That seems to be an ongoing issue.
And how about, letting them go out on their own? Is it different than when you were growing up? Are they allowed to, go out on their own more often or less often?
It's very, very different than when I was growing up. And interestingly, I'm based in Halifax now. I grew up outside of Toronto, and spent the first part of my parenting years in Vancouver. And each location geographically has been very different parenting styles. In Vancouver, it's not very common to let your children to go to the park and play by themselves. Whereas here in Halifax now, they do that all the time. They'll ride their bikes around the neighborhood with their friends, and it's a lot more common actually to the way that I was raised than when I was living in Vancouver. So I've definitely noticed, pockets of geographical difference. And I think part of that also is raising kids in more urban situations versus more rural situations as well.
Yeah, I hear that a lot from parents that they that it's much different than when they were growing up. I know when I was growing up, it was, go out, come back for lunch, maybe, and then be back when the street lights came on. And I think there's a sense, and it may be because of the amount of information that we have access to now, that it's less safe than decades ago, when that isn't the fact. It isn't true, but it's a perception, and it's interesting to see how it has changed over the years. So Ashley, what's your experience? Do you feel like your kids are safer now, than you were growing up, or how is it different if it is?
It was definitely different. The jury's still out on if they're safer than I was or not. But no, I think in a lot of ways they are, especially when it comes to car seats. I recently saw a picture of myself as a child in a car seat asleep. And I mean, could we even call it a car seat? It was literally a metal bar, this thin metal bar that just wrapped around and went like, didn't even touch me. So, I mean, that would have killed me if there was an accident. That would have done it. So, I mean, car seats have definitely come a long way. And I'm a child passenger safety technician, so I get the pleasure to install car seats for a lot of grandparents that have no sweet clue what they're looking at, or why is this like a spaceship? Like, what's going on? But and of course you get the comments like, oh gosh, well, we never put you guys in that, and look, here you are. And sadly, the dark answer to that is, well, not everybody is here, and I'm lucky that I am. So we have to do, there's these safety changes that have come with safety over the years for a very good reason. And so that's probably the biggest one. The other one I would say is definitely safer in terms of the items that we've had for our kids. Like, didn't have the baby walkers with the wheels, which still get passed around somehow. Things like that there's some safety concerns when it comes to sleep and what's available in Canada versus other countries. And then let's just find access to them anyway and bring them here. So people will be resourceful. But I guess coming back to your question, it definitely, there's some things that have been similar. And that would be going out in the neighborhood. Mm-hmm. I will actually think back to like, oh yeah, like we were actually allowed to go out and do this by this age. And that makes sense. Like, have them back at a particular time. And we do happen to live in a neighborhood where there are a bunch of kids around their ages. So it's actually kind of nice. And we felt like, hey, would we have done this if we were in a different neighborhood? Probably, like what Heather's saying, maybe not. Mm-hmm. But we felt safe to do so because we know the families in our neighborhood quite well. Kids are all at the same school, kind of look out for one another. So that, I would say, has kind of been the same. And I actually looked back to what was done with me there. I'm like, okay, you can let go, Ashley. Like, let them go. It's going to be fine.
Yeah, that. I think that's a similar experience that I've had as well. Why I see you nodding and laughing that that this is resonating for you. What about your experience when you were growing up? Do you feel like your child is going to be more or less safe than you were?
I definitely feel like Ashley was saying, at least with the stuff available. I too actually looked at myself in a car seat from the 80s there and had the similar reaction. Like, oh my God, that is awful. I'm also a child passenger safety technician, so had a similar feeling to that. No, I definitely think I definitely feel like he's growing up in a safer area now. I feel like part of the anxiety around that feeling that they're not is that, like you said, all of that content is fast spreading and easy access. We hear stuff that happened across the world within minutes, and it can be super uncommon and not likely, and it can feel very real and very much like it's a threat to our own children. And so I feel like that really creates that anxiety around feeling like maybe they're not as safe as we were. But for example, I almost electrocuted myself when I was a toddler because they didn't cover the electrical outlets. I don't know if that was just my parents or if it was an option then, but I took those nice metal beads that used to be in bathrooms that held the drain plug. I ripped that off and stuck it in the grounding portion and lit up the whole living room behind the chair. Now in our house, we have these nice sleek panels. He doesn't even know there's electrical outlets there. So there's, stuff like that. It's very simple. It's just a piece of plastic. It's white. He honestly has no idea what it is. It's been there his whole life. So something that simple that is so readily available now.
Yeah, there's a lot of products, and you each have touched on a couple, the baby walkers with wheels. Canada's the only country that has banned baby walkers with wheels still. But you're right. The internet has unfortunately allowed those products still to come into Canada, even though they try to stop as many as they can at the border, but it's a reality. And there's, myths that those help kids walk faster. They help, they facilitate walking, which is not true. And, the electrical outlets is another example, as you said, Wyatt, of a product that's been improved exponentially since we were growing up. I too have those photos of me on a balcony in a baby walker with wheels that's metal. So, you can always like, oh, wow, what were my parents thinking? But, things change. But the products that we have in our homes, and that, like, all of the products that have, maybe you guys can weigh in on this one, button batteries. That's a really big issue these days, because so many products come with these button batteries, these little small batteries in greeting cards and key fobs and hearing aids and all those types of things. Have you, Wyatt, maybe you've got a young child. Have you had any experiences with those button batteries yet?
No, I am a bit particular about that. I'm also an avionics technician in the RCAF, so it's actually just a fancy way of saying I'm an aircraft electrician. So any of those types of things, I'm really, really nervous about to begin with around him. So we're maybe not the fun parents. I don't like any of the loud, obnoxious toys. They don't enter the house, so they don't have batteries.
Oh, yes, it's amazing. All of the electronics that are in the house. So you mentioned you talked about car seats earlier, and road safety is a huge concern for parents, from buying and installing the car seats or booster seats, or when to transition them to seat belts, and then as they get into their teens, they're going to be driving. What are the concerns you have around that? When to let your kids walk to school by themselves. And there's a myth that they're safer if you drive them. But if you look at the statistics, driving in a motor vehicle, transportation injuries are the leading cause for kids. So they're actually better off physically and safer that if you let them walk. So when you first started using car seats, and some of you are closer to that than others, and Ashley, I know you have a lot of experience. But when you first started using them, what surprised you the most? And maybe Heather, I know that it's a number of years ago, but when you started, dealing with kids and cars, what were some of the surprises or concerns that you had, and the things that you learned?
I mean, it's been really interesting to see. I'm actually the youngest in my family, so my siblings are much older than me, and so I was an aunt by the time I was 13. And so to go from my sister's kids when I was 13 to having my own kids at 24, and now they're closer to driving than they are to car seats. Now my oldest is, and seeing the pace of change just in my experience with kids over 20 years is incredible. It's incredible to see how the advice has changed, how the technology has changed. Kids weren't rear facing very long when my nephew was an infant. And when my youngest was an infant, they were rear facing for quite a while. So it is amazing how quickly things have changed. But I think still to this day, the thing that surprised me the most was, given how important car seat safety is, that there are, places like taxis and Ubers where even the littlest kids aren't required to have any sort of restraint at all. It baffles my mind that we're in 2022 and this is still an issue.
Ashley, you probably have two still in either car seats or booster seats. What's been your experience with car seats, and I know you're a car seat technician, but think back to before you were an expert. What are some of the surprises, or what you've heard families you talk about when they bring their cars in, or when they ask about car seat safety?
Yeah. Well, my kids are 9, 7, and almost 4, so they're actually all still in car seats. Of course, my 2 oldest ones are in booster seats, and using seat belts, so that is a little bit different. But I think what kind of to Heather's point, where she was mentioning, and I completely agree. Like it's troublesome that on Ubers and cabs that you don't actually need to have one. But I think the other side to that coin is that there's a cost to these car seats, and many of them are quite, up there in price. And what I find, I think when the families that I talk with, especially in prenatal class, when we talk about car seats, it's always a topic of conversation that everyone is like, what are you getting? What are you getting? There's so many options. There's like too many options. And then they seem to think that the more expensive ones are safer, when actually, hey, if they're out there, they are safe. They're great. It's more about like, does it fit in your vehicle? And do you like it? And do you want to carry it around or whatever? So the cost and just also variety is great, but it seems to be there's a little too many options for parents, and matching it with the stroller and stuff like that. So those are some pretty big gaps I think we're still working through, but I think it just kind of comes around to education, which again is why I love that you're doing this podcast and getting these messages out there, because they're definitely still not out there enough.
Yeah, Wyatt, you must have you've probably been knee deep in all of the different options that you have for car seats. I've had so many parents, say to me, "Oh, I feel so dumb. I don't know how to install this in my car, or my kid doesn't fit in the car seat properly." And it's like, why is this so complicated? Like, why can't we make this easier to transport kids safely when we do have to transport them in vehicles? What's been your experience with car seats and your little one?
Yeah, I'm also a car seat tech, and I became very interested pretty early on. We decided to skip the infant seat, which is like not a common thing at all. Ended up really paying off because my son was born in March 2020, where we didn't go anywhere for I don't even know how many months. But he was also a very large baby when he was born. What I realized was needing to contact both the vehicle manufacturer and the car seat manufacturer because the information I needed and wanted to ensure the install was correct. And then when I went to work and like commented like I'd done this, I quickly realized that nobody else does this. And that, like Ashley said, there's a lot of that education is missing. Everything ranging from I didn't bother to read it. Why would you read it? There's just the clip things. You clip it in. There's, or you just do both. There's a spot for the clip things and you do the seatbelt. I put it wherever made sense. Oh, when they reach the minimum to move to the next thing, I move them to the next thing. I really realized that it really is complicated, and that really pushed me to seek out the certification to try and do some of the prenatal classes, education points, and stuff like that here in the Valley. A big thing that surprised me really is actually that it actually goes back to me being an aircraft technician, is that they're not required for children under 2 or any child on an aircraft at all. And I spend my whole working life around aircraft. And if you do that for longer than vacation, you realize that turbulence is very unpredictable. It's air. The pilot doesn't know it's coming. And everything on that aircraft is strapped down or secured, except for infants. So it kind of blew my mind there. And I really encourage anyone to purchase that extra seat. Bring your car seat. You also know then it's safe with you the whole way through. And a lot of our friends actually, after talking to me, do just that now for children even under 2.
Yeah, it is a gap, and I was just at the airport recently, and I did see a couple of parents lugging their car seat with them. So that was good. But I think it's still unusual. And I'm pretty sure they, get the eye from other people, like, why are you doing that? Or this is too complicated. Just hold your child on your seat. That you've had that personally. I'm guessing.
I got asked all the way through the airport if I wanted to check it. It's like, no, he's going to sit in it. He's like, oh, but isn't he under 2? Yeah, I bought a seat for him. He's going to sit in it.
Yeah, it's amazing. One of the other areas that I just want to touch on is falls, and it's a leading cause of injury, and most people just completely overlook it. Like when I talk to them about road safety or poisoning or things like that, they get it. But falls are something that people are not aware of that is that dangerous. And we see this with kids. We see it, downstairs and off furniture. And unfortunately, in the good weather, we see kids falling out of windows and off of balconies and things like that. I mean, falls is an issue across all ages. But what, were you surprised to know that falls are a leading cause of injury? And what is some of your experience with falls, if you weren't surprised about that? Ashley, Heather, maybe I'll start with you.
I don't think I was surprised to know that, only because perhaps my family is particularly accident prone, but my girls both had their fair share of falls, and they always kept us on our toes. They were early walkers and climbers. And, when you're trying to find that balance between letting them discover their abilities and learn how to, take safe, calculated risks and, wanting to wrap them in bubble wrap, not wanting to spend too many visits to the ER. It really was at the forefront of my mind, making sure that they were safe, that they were secure, that their environment was set up so that they could explore and take those risks and mitigate as much of that fall risk as possible.
Yeah, Ashley, what's been your experience? You have three girls that are very active. I'm sure there's been scraped knees and bumps and bruises and things like that.
Yes. Luckily, one of the three is very cautious by nature. She didn't even really jump off 2 feet until she was maybe 3 or 4. I don't know, but she's very cautious, still very much is. So that's my middle child. My oldest almost fell out of a tree recently. So that was definitely something. She was climbing and just went a little bit higher than she normally does and got on a branch that wasn't quite thick enough. And luckily she caught her own fall. But that kind of thing is scary because you want to let your kid climb a tree. You want to let them do those things. But then that happens. And then, okay, are we not doing that again? Or actually, I found it was funny. She immediately said, like, she was shook up. And said, well, I'm not climbing that tree again. But a few hours later, there she was, got her confidence back and went out. So that's a juggle that we're just trying to, as Heather was saying, like, we don't want to put the bubble wrap on. But right. It can happen still. And with the other side of it, my youngest, she's always trying to keep up with her older sisters. Mm-hmm. And so she's trying to climb the things or run as fast or do so. There's definitely more falls going on there for her, but I don't know. Maybe it's because she's the third child and I do let her go more that she just jumps right back up and I'm okay and keeps going. And then maybe will show me later where the scrape happened or something. But I'm sure personality wise, all that kind of stuff. But the parenting has been different with her because of how her personality is with her bigger sisters.
Right. Yeah, those bumps and bruises, those aren't the things that we're worried about, right? We don't want to bubble wrap kids so that they don't have those experiences. It's the, real serious injuries or fatal injuries that we want to stop, like kids falling out of windows. That is not a good thing. Right. Wyatt, your son is quite young and is just on his first experiences walking. What have you been doing around your house in terms of fall prevention?
Yeah, falls are definitely a concern, especially like he does like to take a significant amount of risks. What we actually tried to do was provide more like developmentally appropriate things for him to get that out, that outlet on. Like we bought a pickler triangle. He's been climbing that since he was like 6 months, and then he just sort of like escalated from there to be able to get up and over it, and that seemed to really help him when we'd go to the parks. We also made the decision to never lift him up onto something that he couldn't get up onto himself, which was shockingly
Mm.
difficult to kind of commit to, because then it meant he couldn't get to the slide unless he could get himself there. And he actually, I feel like he really knows the limits of his own body. Not to say he doesn't fall, he definitely falls. He's flipped off the pickler, been caught by my wife or myself, and he's fallen off couches and the whole thing. And but they're the big falls we've found, at least we've been fortunate with. I feel like he's very capable. He really trusts what he's able to do, getting up and down on those play structures.
Hmm.
And the look on his face when he first made it up to the top and went down the slide for the first time was pretty priceless too. So it kind of made it worth it to hold out. It was hard, but
Yeah.
it was a neat experience that way.
I'll bet he was so proud of himself, I'm sure, and just
Definitely.
thrilled with the experience. Yeah. Oh, that's the best. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a really interesting conversation, and I mean, the question is, are we safe yet? I think the answer is yes, but things are different than they were, and there's a lot of improved products and improved knowledge that we have. So thanks so much for sharing all of your experiences. It's been really interesting.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thanks
very
for having
much.
us.
Do you have older children? National Teen Driver Safety Week launches on Sunday, October 15th. Check out parachute.ca/NTDSW for great tips. That's parachute.ca/NTDSW.
It's time to open your parachute.
Stephanie Cowle is Parachute's Director of Knowledge Translation, and she has spent more than a decade working in the area of injury and trauma prevention. Stephanie, it's so great to have you on the podcast today.
We're really glad to be here.
So we heard parents talking about, whether they think they're safer today, or their children are safer today than they were in the past. And there's always emerging issues, new products and things that come out, but there seems to be a bit of nostalgia for the past, that, it was better back then, and people, felt that they were safer. But the reality is we're safer now than we have been. This conversation, I think, is great, because we can kind of pick that apart, and it really get to some of the myth bustings in terms of what actually poses a risk, and how much children are safer today than they were in the past. What was your impression from the conversations that the parent group had?
Yeah, it's a bit of an interesting mix of when we look back on our childhoods or generations before us, a little bit of oh my gosh, I can't believe we did that. I can't believe, we sat in cars that way or played that way. And then also a mix of, we were so free, things were better back then. Kids are so bubble wrapped these days. So I think in that conversation, we heard both of those things come out. And I think we commonly see those sentiments coming around on social media and discussions with friends and family. But when we look at the way things have changed for injury prevention, and in so many ways, we're so much safer now. And the discussion really highlighted that there's some visible ways we can observe that now, right? So we saw the example of car seats. That's, I think, one of those quintessential examples we can think of then versus now, that everybody can recognize that things have changed.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that when people think about safety, motor vehicle or transportation, car seats especially come to mind at first. Did you hear anything in the conversation that surprised you in terms of the parents approaches or thoughts about car seats?
Well, it's interesting when we think about where car seats are required and not, where they're commonly used and not. There were some observations there that, hey, we know they keep kids safe and they're required in our own vehicles, but how come they aren't required, in public transportation or when we fly, and in taxis, which in many provinces are considered public transportation, so it's not required there. So it is interesting that there's still this little bit of a divide of, we know, particularly in, smaller vehicles and sedans and such, that they do keep kids safe, but they're not always required there. So it does end up being a parental choice. And, there can be differing opinions on that. And there was the story about getting some funny looks or getting questions about wanting to check the car seat and really needing to, kind of as a parent make those decisions and stick with it in those cases. It is really important for parents to be aware of what the regulations are in their area. For example, in Ontario, a ride-sharing vehicle is actually considered a private vehicle, so car seats are required, and actually those services are required to provide them for you. So it's definitely the kind of thing that we can't make assumptions, especially in a country as big as Canada. So understanding the rules and regulations of where you live and also where you're traveling to is really important.
Yeah, and that's that change, the time frame when the change comes in. I think that's most challenging to work with is keeping up on those regulations. What are the regulations where I live, and if I move, are they the same? Because they differ somewhat from province to province. But there are things that have been in place, that are in place for parents now that maybe weren't for their parents, and that their parents think that well, we survived, fine. Do we really need these interventions? And when we think about the number of kids that were seriously injured or killed because those things weren't in place, we know, and in particular from the data, tell me a little bit about some of the trends like that. We've talked about we are safer than we used to be, and sort of that concept of people thinking, well, we survived without this. Why can't kids today survive?
Yeah, absolutely. It's not a survival of the fittest contest out here. I think at a societal level, we want everyone to have the chance at a long life, live to the fullest. And there's a reason why in public health and injury prevention and all sorts of health sciences, stories are important. Anecdotes can be important, but we don't want to take stories as evidence. So yes, all of us talking about and looking back at our childhoods today, we did survive. But unfortunately, there were a lot of preventable deaths in car crashes, children falling from really high, unsafe playground equipment that kids never should have been playing on, that was extreme. There are ways we can look back and we've really learned more about, from the data, how Canadians, how people are injured and what interventions work to prevent that. And some of those, like we've already said, the car seat stands out as a really clear example. There are other aspects to our life that we probably take for granted that we don't realize that injury prevention, science and advocacy and policy work were behind. So things like the fact that, most medication you access, whether it's you're taking acetaminophen or you're taking an allergy pill, that's going to come in a child-resistant bottle. And it can be a bit of a nuisance sometimes when you're struggling to get that bottle open, but, all things considering, it doesn't really affect your day-to-day life. But that is, an intervention that prevents, particularly children from accessing things that can cause them really serious harm. And it's a simple invention and it's something we take for granted, but the work of injury prevention was behind that, and we had to learn and do better.
Yeah, and those are kind of invisible injury interventions that the parents today, like, they wouldn't think twice about a medication bottle having a child-resistant cap, or even understanding that, those blister packs, that's actually, to slow down kids accessing a quantity of medication in those blister packs. So there's sort of things that we live with every day that we don't even think about, that are prevention strategies that have been put into place since, in the last 20, 25 years, that the parents today haven't had to live through. They just take it as a given. There are always new issues that we need to be concerned about, that pose some risks, and in some cases we need a little time to figure out what exactly are the risks for these types of products. We look at some e-scooters, something like e-scooters that have come into place, and the number of products that now have button batteries that can be dangerous to kids. Talk about some of those emerging issues. What are some tips maybe that parents can be aware of when they're dealing with some of these newer products that are on the market?
Yeah, I mean, things are constantly changing, especially when we think about all the inventions that keep coming out to keep us entertained, keep our life convenient. Tech is constantly evolving, and those create changes in our environment and also in our behavior. And with that is going to, impact risk of injury in some ways. One of the prominent emerging issues we've seen over the last few years in Canada has been with the legalization of cannabis and the regulated sale of cannabis edibles. And these are products that, when accessed by children, it affects them differently than it affects adults. And we've seen patterns of increased access to edibles unintentionally, with kind of resulting poisoning and harms in children. And so it's really important that as new products or new substances enter our environments, as we bring these into the home, we're just really aware of how they can impact our family members, and children in particular, who are so vulnerable to what's in their environment, and always looking to explore, and they love to explore with their hands and mouth. It can probably be overwhelming to try and think about all the things to stay on top of, and okay, it's constantly changing. What's next? But I think certainly staying in touch with various sources, credible sources of information is important. A website like parachute.ca, staying in touch with Health Canada's product information and regulations. There's consistent, advisories and information. And again, it's not to be against change. It's not to say we shouldn't embrace new technologies and ways of moving and various products in our lives, but just to be aware of the potential hazards. And there's often really simple things we can do to prevent injuries. With cannabis, something as simple as keeping your cannabis in that child-resistant packaging and locking it up and away with the medications. That's it. But being aware is the first step.
So I think the good news, or the message from this podcast, is the good news is we are safer. Our kids are safer. They're living in an environment that is safer, but that there are still hazards that parents may be aware of or may not be aware of, and that it's important to really assess what's in your home, when you travel, when you play, and just be aware of those hazards and the things that are really at risk of harming your kids or having serious or fatal outcomes. We're not interested in sort of the bumps and bruises, but certainly things that are going to really impact your child's health and well-being is something that I think all parents are interested in getting more information on. So parachute.ca is a great resource. I think maybe actually one of the things that just struck me is the warranty card on children's products that you get. By sending that in, you become connected with the manufacturer, and if there's any recalls, and that you will be notified. So, if we can share these kinds of tips and information for parents, hopefully it'll make their lives that much easier.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thanks for joining me today, Stephanie. It's really been interesting talking to you and getting the perspective on the concept of, are we safer than we were before? Are we safe yet? And really enjoyed talking to you. Thanks so much.
Thank you. It's definitely great to look back where we came from and wonder where we're going.
Very true. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. Popping the Bubble Wrap is a podcast of Parachute, Canada's national injury prevention charity, whose mission is for Canadians to live long lives to the fullest by preventing serious and fatal injuries. We release episodes every 2 weeks. Join me for the next episode when we explore falls and how to prevent the serious ones. Help us reach parents and caregivers by sharing this link with your friends and family and giving us a 5-star review wherever you listen to your podcasts. For more information, visit us at parachute.ca. Have a question? Write to us at poppingthebubblerap@parachute.ca. You can also leave a message at 647-776-5123. That's 647-776-5123.
Popping the Bubble Wrap is produced for Parachute by Story Studio Network and Eye Contact Productions.
This is Story Studio Network.